Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us for another installment of our Emergency Preparedness 101 short videos. Today's short video is on stay or go, whether you stay in your home and shelter in place or whether you decide to go and evacuate due to a hazard. So we're going to get right into it today to keep this short. So the first question is, do you evacuate or do you shelter in place?
So when evacuating, it's important to understand that when there's a hazard to you or your family, if you stay in your home. So that's in Larimer County, one of the most common hazards are wildfires. So if there's wildfire in your area and you need to evacuate, please do so and move. And then otherwise, sheltering in place is when there's a hazard to you or your family if you leave your home. And again, here in Larimer County, the most common hazard for this sheltering in place are blizzards or any winter storms. So in this scenario, so you might have to understand how to get information. So here in Larimer County, we have multiple ways to get information about hazards and weather in your specific area. So nocoalert.org is the place to sign up for emergency notifications, evacuation alerts, and any other information about evacuation. So it's really important to stay informed and stay alert and know where to get your information.
The one thing I really want to make sure is clear in this video, especially when we're talking about evacuation, is never wait for an official notification to take action for your own safety. We hear from people all of the time who say, I knew that there was a threat, or I saw the fire coming towards my home, but I hadn't received a notification, so I didn't know what to do. We really want everybody to be self-empowered to take action, especially for your own safety. So if your gut tells you you should be leaving, you should be leaving. You should not wait. You should not call somebody for verification. If you don't feel safe with the information that you have, you should take action for the safety of you and your family. So I can't stress that enough. We'll probably say it a couple more times in this video just to make sure that that's clear. But again, have multiple ways to get information so that if one way of getting information fails, you can get information in another way. And then also sign up for emergency alerts so that we can notify you if there is an emergency or disaster. And again, take action when you need to, regardless of whether you get notified of a hazard.
So sheltering in place, it's most appropriate when a hazard exists outside of your home, like we just talked about, and staying inside is the safest option. And again, in Larimer County, it's a winter storm or blizzard most of the time for these situations.
There's also a couple of other hazards where you would want to shelter in place. Another hazard that we have had in the county during the 2013 flood was when we had roads that washed away. Maybe the house is up on a hill and the house itself is safe, but the egress routes or the way that you're going to be able to come and go from that home has now been damaged or destroyed. So you either have to wait for debris to be removed or wait for that road to be repaired. A lot of people were airlifted out because we couldn't get to them along the roads. Some people decided to stay. So if you decide to say, this is where shelter in place would be the best option for you.
So a good rule of thumb for sheltering in place is to have enough supplies for everyone in the family for at least a week. This includes pets, service animals, and large animals. So anything that you can think of that you're going to need within a week, food, supplies, medications, and for your pets and large animals. It's good to include in this supply list for a week.
And, you know, we hear from hurricane states a lot and a lot of the preparedness videos that are out there about a 72-hour kit. Again, Colorado's a little bit different with our hazards. Sometimes our hazards, especially a blizzard, that could last several days, well past 3 days. Or you could have, like I just mentioned, where we had with the 2013 flood, where the roads no longer exist because of a flood event and you've decided to stay in your home. So you really want to have at least a week's supply for everybody in your family, including your pets, service animals, and large animals, to ensure that you're okay for up to a week. So here's some considerations that we want to talk about for shelter in place. I mentioned the 72-hour kit or building a preparedness kit. You don't necessarily have to have a kit in your home, but you do need to think through what are the supplies that you need in your home and where are those supplies so that you can successfully and safely stay in your residence for a long period of time if you cannot leave. So we're going to do a separate video on building a preparedness kit for your car and building a preparedness kit for your home, because that I think is just a lot of information. And so we're going to do that separately. But some specific information for shelter in place today is making sure that you have enough food and water again for a week. A good rule of thumb for water is that you have a gallon of water per person per day. I think that also applies to pets, a gallon of water per pet per day. And then for you also want to be able to have enough medications to last you for a longer period of time if you cannot leave your home. I was in Park County when we had a 6-week long blizzard, and we ended up having to snowmobile in medications to people from pharmacies because there was no way for people to get out and no way for us to keep those roads open. You don't want to be in that situation. Many insurance companies now allow you to get a 3-month supply of medications. So I suggest that if anybody has that option, you should do that. One, it saves you money most of the times because you get a discount where typically you would pay for 3 months of copays. Insurance companies a lot of times decrease that to 2 or 1 month. So you save money, and then also you have a greater supply of medications. Not all medications are allowed to do this, but check with your pharmacy or check with your doctor. And then also if you need medical equipment, oxygen is something that we get calls about quite frequently when we have a power outage and people only have a few hours supply. You should always make sure that you have multiple days supplies of oxygen or other medical equipment that is a life safety equipment for you. Just to ensure if you're ever stuck in your home and you cannot get to safety and we cannot get to you, that you have enough for your own safety. Pets and service animals, again, for shelter in place is just making sure that they have what they would need on a daily basis as far as food and water, and if they have medications as well. Livestock and large animals is the same. They could probably be okay on their own during this event as long as you're able to feed them. So some other scenarios for that we wanted to talk about here specifically are power outage and hazardous materials. So for a power outage, that often accompanies a winter storm or a blizzard. If we do have a power outage, some good supplies to have is one, a battery operated weather radio to get updates and information. Again, this is just one more way that you can get information about emergency alerts and warnings, as well as additional information as that storm moves through the area or as we get information about what to do and what the impacts are. Also think about all those supplies that you have in your home that require power. So if you're using canned food in your supply kit for an emergency, but you don't have a can opener that can open cans that doesn't rely on not water. What am I thinking of? That doesn't rely on power, then you're going to want to have a manual can opener or other kitchen items that do that. Also, camp stoves work really well in a pinch. So a lot of folks do have camping stoves. If the power goes out, you can cook with a camping stove, and it's really good for the family. One thing to remember is adequate ventilation when you're using those stoves. And then finally, flashlights and batteries are really important with power outages or with severe weather. You might not have the light that you normally would. So having those flashlights available is important for you. Hazardous materials is a very different animal. And I just wanted to touch on this briefly. I can't tell you whether it's appropriate to shelter in place or evacuate for hazardous materials. And that's because it depends upon the material that we're talking about or the chemical. So this is very hazard dependent. And typically what's going to happen here is you will be given instructions when the emergency notification goes out that will tell you about key actions to take, whether it's best to evacuate the area or whether it's best to stay and seal up the home or turn off your ventilation system. So those specific actions will be given to you for hazardous materials.
All righty, so now that we talked about when to shelter in place, we're gonna understand how when to evacuate. So an evacuation is when there's a hazard to you or your family if you stay in your home. Right, so things to think about an evacuation are here in Lemmer County, we have two main evacuation notifications. So the first one is the voluntary, which this is a notification to evacuate, but it just gives people more time when there is. This voluntary evacuation is not always issued. It's only issued when there is time. So at this time, folks with special considerations would need to evacuate and self-evacuate. If you need assistance, people with disabilities would need to evacuate at this time. So also another consideration is if you have large vehicles such as RVs, trailers, or large animals as well, and just keeping these in mind, and if you get this notification, and you have some of these considerations, or you feel like you need to evacuate, please do so. So yeah, don't always wait for an emergency notification if you need to evacuate. And then the second form of evacuation alert is mandatory. So this is when there's no time and you need to move immediately and move to safety.
All right, so a key for the voluntary evacuation, we provided you some examples here, but a key is if you think you're going to need additional time to evacuate, whether you have, maybe you have a large family, you have a lot of family members that you have to try to make sure that everybody gets out safely. Anytime it will take additional time to evacuate, that voluntary evacuation gives you that time. But again, like Ricardo said, and I said before, you're not always going to have a voluntary evacuation, and you might not get a notification. So as soon as you think that you're at risk, you need to start taking that action that you need to get to safety. So planning for evacuation, there's a few key considerations here. First is plan for what you will need to take with you. So just like having supplies at home for shelter in place, you need to know what do you need to take in your vehicle for your family and for your safety. We have a separate video on finance and insurance, and in that video we go over important documents. That's a really good video to look at to see which documents you need to have available. It's best to have those documents outside of the home or in the cloud where you can reach them from any computer. That way you don't have to worry about trying to gather them up when you're evacuating. You're already under stress. It's important just to leave with your family. So plan for what you absolutely need to take with you, like medications, or maybe even just making sure you know where your wallet is at all times, so you have the money that you need when you evacuate. Then you want to plan for how you will leave and where you will go. Some areas of our county have limited egress routes, which is the way out of an area. Some are one way in, one way out. Others have 1 to 2 routes. Others have many if you're in that urban environment. But how are you going to leave and where are you going to go is important. If there is an egress route that is blocked by the hazard, like a wildfire has crossed a road, oftentimes the communication center will give that information when they send out an evacuation notice. If there is a reason for you to go in one specific direction, they will also let you know that if they have that information at the time. It is important to note that you should not use off-roads or Jeep trails when trying to evacuate unless, that's the only option. And the reason is because a lot of times people get stuck on those roads and then there is really no way out, and anybody behind them is also now stuck with no way to turn around and get out. This is why we use main roads for evacuation routes as much as possible. The next thing is plan for shelter with friends or family outside the hazard area. We will activate shelters as soon as we hear that we're evacuating people from their homes. However, it's always a lot more comfortable if you're with family and friends and you're not in a shelter environment congregate setting. So just consider where you might be able to stay outside of a hazard area. And then finally, plan for notifying friends and family once you're safe and out of the hazard area. We want to try to keep calls to a minimum that are coming into the hazard area. So if you let people know via social media or via phone call that you're safe, it eliminates those calls from coming into our area and also lets everybody know that you're safe and how to get a hold of you. All right, so that is all for Emergency Preparedness 101 for the evacuation and shelter in place. We hope you enjoyed this video. Ricardo, do you have anything you want to add?
So there's my contact info. And again, I'm the Communications and Community Engagement Coordinator here for the Office of Emergency Management. So if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We appreciate it.